Welcome back to part 2 of our Squig Hopper painting guide. As I mentioned in the first video, I had some video problems and I had to redo some of the footage, so I decided to switch over to the Bongrot Bounders, which is kind of a good thing because they have a bit more detail. We can go into painting armor and wood and some other things like that. We're jumping right into the middle of the painting of the skin because I've changed that slightly as I went through painting the unit. What you see here, initially I started off with a base coat of Uniform Green and then I added Pale Yellow to the highlights, which using a mix of that right now for the highlights. However, the Uniform Green the coverage wasn't the best. I think I have a bad bottle and I was trying to just work with it. Halfway through the unit, I actually went back and started using a mix of Military Green and Uniform Green first as an undercoat or as a deep shade layer, and then apply the Uniform Green and now the highlight mix. And then for the final highlights, almost straight Pale Yellow, just a little bit of the Uniform Green mixed in to tone it down just a touch. This is an extremely basic, kind of generic standard way of painting goblins with these colors. The Uniform Green is very close to a old school Games Workshop Goblin Green color, and I would have liked to add a little bit more color, maybe work some purples or reds into the goblins. However, on these particular ones, there's just not enough flesh for that to really work. They're all wearing hoods. In this case, they're wearing helmets. So all you have is just hands, mainly, and feet on a couple of them. So maybe we'll work in some different colors on some of the other projects, but for now we have to keep it fairly simple just because we don't have a lot of flesh to work with. Next are the robes, and for that we have obviously black, and most of what you see here is the black primer. We're just going to paint right over it, and just some areas where I was a little bit sloppy with the paintbrush, that was touched up with black paint. For the robes, I am going with an extremely cool black color, more towards midnight blue to be honest, because I really wanted to punch up the robes, make them look a bit more interesting. And for the first highlight, we are using dark Prussian blue and being quite liberal with it, really going in to a large surface area and placing down this highlight rather than just highlighting the edges like we would normally do when painting a regular black. Our next highlight is a 50-50 mix of dark Prussian blue and game color Shadow Grey. And this color is just going on the edge area, so the very upper raised area of any folds and also along the edges. This highlight, we're cutting back much smaller area than that initial dark Prussian blue. And for our final highlight, white added to that mix. And you can see this is just an edge highlight, even less than an edge highlight. This is a point highlight. Just adding this to the edges of the robes wherever the highest fold comes to a point. So we're using this very sparingly because we don't want to over highlight our midnight blue black here, because that's really going to change the color, the base color of it, and have it start becoming too light, too bright of a color. On to the metal bits, and I have already base coated them with a mix of Vallejo Model Air Steel and Gun Gray. And we're gonna now put on a coat of GW Fugean Orange. And just on some of the plates, not all of them, just picking out a few. I don't want to make everything rusty, just want to give some of the plates a little bit more color. And then then on some of the other metal plates, we're giving those a coat with Agrax Earthshade. So some we're making dirty and some we're making rusty. And then over all the plates, even the ones that we've already washed, giving everything a coat of Nuln Oil. So this is going to add our shade to it. However, some of that orange and some of that brown is still going to show through. Now I'm still playing around with these GW shades, trying to learn how best to use them. So in a case like this, I found that 2 coats often works better than 1 here. So we'll do 1 light coat, let it dry, and then add another one to darken it up a bit more. Once all our washes are dry, we can add some highlights using straight steel for that. And just picking out the edges very carefully, also doing a little bit of stippling work to show scratches and what have you. So we're not trying to do a clean edge here. Just stipple the brush, kind of stab at it very lightly with a light brush, slightly kind of like a dry brush, so the brush isn't completely full of paint. On to the lances, and I base coated those with some model color flat brown. And now we are going on with the highlights of Parasite Brown mixed with flat brown. My initial plan was to paint in, texture in a wood grain to the lances. However, they're very purposefully, crudely sculpted, so they just don't have the flat area that we need to paint in a wood grain. So I'm having to go with the texture that's already on the lance. So I'm applying this highlight, trying to pick out the edges as much as I can, but basically just drawing the side of the brush down the lance and letting the paint pick out the highlight areas, the wood grain for me, rather than painting it between those areas. Then our next highlight is straight Parasite Brown, really trying to pick out the edges of all that wood. It's got a really nice crude carve to the wood, so we want to pick out all that nice detail. That's the other reason why I couldn't really do a wood grain here, because the lances are so crudely cut. It's actually really nice, and if we put a wood grain over that, we're going to lose that, and they're going to actually look straighter, which for goblins, we don't want that. And then our final highlight is Plague Brown, highlighting the tip of the lance and just a few of the sharper edges, also picking out any scratches on the lances as well. On the ones that have a wooden tip, I actually did go one more step, add a little bit of beige to the Plague Brown, just for a little extra highlight. And then for our final step, a little bit of shade with Camo Black Brown, working it into the recesses, any cracks, any little chips in the wood. Also, most importantly, any flat areas that we did not highlight. Next to those flat areas, I'm running a line of the Camo Black Brown down. So that's going to give us our little bit of wood grain texture that I wanted to achieve initially, rather than just painting a wood texture on it. We're using the contours of the lance to paint that. So just any flat areas that just need a little bit of extra, a little punch, we'll just do a little line of the Camo Black Brown, and it'll make things look a lot more interesting. On to the shrooms, and we are giving those a base coat of beige, and this is going over an undercoat of green ochre just because of the black primer. Then a wash of Seraphim Sepia. Then paint the mushrooms any bright colors that you like. I used a variety of colors, flat red, deep green, some aquamarine. I tried to limit the reds. I didn't want too many reds because of the red squig, but go ahead and paint any color that you really like. And then I'm giving everything a coat of Agrax Earthshade. Also, I'm working into any deeper recesses on the stems. Go ahead and add your highlights, white for your blues, yellow for your greens and your reds. Try to highlight the tip of all the shrooms and then actually highlight for a little texture in the lines towards the bottom, the wider bed of the shrooms. And then simply a small brush and white for the dots. Some of the shrooms have raised dots, which I painted. Other ones are flat. I still painted those as well because I want more dots. And then highlights and cleanup work on the stems with some pale sand mixed in with our original beige. Hey, looky that we are all done. Pretty neat, huh? Obviously, I kept to pretty much original paint scheme idea here. Reds, we got the blacks, and we got the green skin. I really like the red, so that's why I kept it. I did vary it a bit, going into more orange and more into a darker red. My initial thought was to work up the yellow and then work more of the purples in. However, I just like the red. Another thing to point out, we did add variation to the squigs. However, the goblins, we kept all similar. There's not a big variation in the skin tones or the robes. And that's to help to tie the unit together. If you want to do squigs that are a wider variety of colors, you can obviously do that. However, if you keep all the goblins the same color, then that's going to help bind your whole unit and eventually your whole army together. I don't recall if I mentioned it, but orcs and goblins were actually my very first Warhammer Fantasy army way, way, way back when. And it's kind of fun coming back to them, seeing the all-new sculpts, all-new plastic, much more detail compared to the squig hoppers, for example, in this video, what we initially had. It takes a lot more time to paint them because there's a lot more detail and a lot more time to build them. But the final results, I think, speak for themselves, the amount of detail we get in miniatures nowadays. So aren't we lucky? So there we go. One video down, a couple more to come for our Goblin Force, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.
Brought to you by the Booze Council, because booze really satisfies.
Booze takes a dull party and makes it better.
Booze makes you popular and heals all wounds. B-O-O-Z-E,